November 18th, 1986, Newtown, Connecticut. Pan Am flight attendant Helle Crafts is coming home after working a flight from Frankfurt, Germany to New York City. Waiting for her are her 3 children and her husband Richard, a pilot for Eastern Airlines. But the next morning, Helle was gone. And even though her husband didn't seem worried, her friends were. And in the days that followed, there were a lot more questions than answers. Questions like, where did Helle go? And why did her cheating husband rent a commercial-grade wood chipper? This shocking case captivated a nation and had everyone wondering how an ordinary man became a cold-blooded killer. This is Richard Crafts and the Mystery of the Wood Chipper. Hey, y'all, I'm Chris Calvert.
And I'm her husband, Rob Potterworth. Welcome to Hitched to Homicide.
For better or worse.
Till death do us part.
Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, welcome. And for our friends in Portugal.
Yes.
Bem-vindo.
I'd love to go to Portugal.
I know.
Never been.
It's gorgeous.
Well, wherever you're listening, be sure to hit that subscribe button, then like, rate, and review the podcast so others who love true crime just like you do can find us.
Yep.
And if you're watching us on YouTube today, hit that subscribe button below. You can find us on Instagram at Hitched to Homicide or on X at H2H_podcast. Mm-hmm. And if you want true crime with us every single day, 24/7, all the time, please go join our closed Facebook group, The In-Laws and Outlaws.
True crime all time.
Yeah, true crime all the time. Just go to Facebook and type in H2H In-Laws and Outlaws. Answer a few questions. You're in. Go join. We love that group. They're a lot of fun.
Hilarious.
And they're very supportive.
Yes.
And they're all true crime folks.
Yes.
So there's not a whole lot you can't say in there that people don't laugh at.
Exactly.
We also now have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you want to send Rob some caffeine. You can find that link in our show notes. We appreciate all your messages and emails. Thank you for being with us every single week. You can also send us a text message. It says text Chris and Rob if you go into our RSS feed.
Yeah.
Pretty fun. Go to the show notes. It's right there at the top, and you can text us.
Yeah.
We've been getting some text messages, and we appreciate them very, very much.
Yes, we do.
This case is a little bit crazy.
Well, it sounds like a hell of a case.
Yep. She's from Denmark.
Okay.
Her name is Helle, Helle, but it's pronounced Helle.
Okay.
Before we get started today, let me thank some sources. Forensic Files, Stories of the Unsolved, Wikipedia, The Newtown Bee, The New Times, Find a Grave, Boston.com, and The New York Times.
Okay. Well, you ready?
I am.
Let's do it.
Helle Lorch Nielsen is born on July 7th, 1947 in Charlottenlund, Denmark, which made me think of Mr. Deeds' Winchesterton Field, whatever it was, the fictional town she said she was from.
Yeah, any city that has more than 12 syllables needs to be outlawed.
And I certainly can't pronounce any of them.
You got it.
But she's born in Denmark. Her mother's name is Elsbeth Nielsen. I couldn't find much about her dad, but I believe he passes away pretty early on in her life. Helle was an only child. She grew up in the suburbs of Copenhagen. She worked as an au pair in London for a while, and after this, she becomes a flight attendant with Capital Airlines.
Okay.
I had never heard of Capital Airlines.
Yeah, well, it must be like a Denmark airline or something like that.
Maybe, but there are a couple of airlines that don't exist anymore that we're going to talk about.
Gotcha.
In 1969, when she's 22, she's training to be a flight attendant for Pan American in Miami, Florida. There's no longer a Pan Am airline anymore.
Nope.
Helle, while she's there in Miami, she meets her future husband and former Marine pilot, Richard Crafts.
Okay.
By the way, Helle officially immigrated from Denmark to the United States on March 30th, 1971.
Gotcha.
Richard, the man that she meets, he's quiet. He's a quiet guy. He's an introvert. He graduated from Darien High School in 1955 and joined the Marines in 1956 and completed his Marine flight school in 1958. He was a helicopter pilot based in Okinawa in 1961. Then he left the Marines under a special arrangement to fly for Air America and the CIA.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah. He flew helicopter missions for about 5 months in 1961 from a base in Udon, Thailand.
Okay.
The missions were in support of Vang Pao, a tribal leader being backed by the CIA. Then he goes back to flying for the Marines for a short while, only to return to fly once again for Air America, both with helicopters and short takeoff and landing planes, both from Udon and another base in Laos in 1966.
Those short takeoff and landings are pretty rough. I did a USO tour back in 1981, and we were on C-130s the whole time. And they're very noisy when you're in the plane. And I remember the intercom coming over, and you're sitting in your web seats on the side of the plane, and all I heard was, and we all just kind of looked at each other. We're sitting in the tarmac, and then we go out on the runway, and all of a sudden they kicked that thing in, and the plane literally went vertical. We were just looking at each other like, what in the world? So we get to where we're going, and all of a sudden we hear, and the plane literally dropped out of the sky because they were doing, assault takeoffs and assault landings. It was crazy. So
all that's code for hang on to your ass.
Exactly.
We're taking off and we're landing.
Well, it just reminded me of Charlie Brown's teacher.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead. Yet I digress.
Yes. But after he's finished working for the CIA, he goes to work as a pilot for Eastern Airlines. Also not an airline that's in operation anymore.
Yeah.
This is where he meets Helle. She's pretty. She's blonde, 5'6". Everybody loved her, including Richard. Richard and Helle get married in Kensington, New Hampshire in 1975 at the home of a friend, and they settled in Newtown, Connecticut with their new son, Andrew, in 1976.
Okay.
They're eventually going to have 2 more children, Thomas and Christina. Richard was making about $120,000 a year, or about $350K a year today, being a pilot. But he was also working as a volunteer Newtown, Connecticut police officer and a part-time police officer in the nearby town of Southbury.
Okay.
Now, after they married and she had children, Helle continued to be a flight attendant for Pan Am. And because they had 3 children, Helle and Richard had a live-in nanny named Dawn Thomas. Now, Helle was completely devoted to her 3 children. They were the loves of her life. She took great pains not to allow her job and frequent travel to interfere with her relationship with her 3 children. They were everything to her. It was all about the kids.
Okay.
In 1984, Richard was diagnosed with late-stage cancer of the stomach and was given a low chance of survival, but he received treatment and made a miraculous recovery and was told, you're in remission.
Wow.
Now, I don't know if he feels like he's got a new lease on life after he goes into remission or not, but by the fall of 1986, Richard was never home, and he was constantly lying about where he was.
Really?
And Helle had kind of had enough of it, and she thinks that Richard is having an affair.
Right.
She's now 39 years old, and it's kind of an unhappy marriage. And Helle even believed she knew who Richard was sleeping with.
Oh, wow.
So she hired herself a private detective named Keith Mayo. What does that remind you of?
An officer and a gentleman.
Mayo days. Yeah. She gave Keith a long-distance phone number from their phone bills. This made me giggle, because you got a phone bill in the mail and it showed you all your long-distance calls and how expensive they were.
Yeah, exactly.
But this was a number that she didn't know. And so she hires Keith, and Keith follows Richard, and he starts taking photos. And when Helle and Keith meet back up again, he tells her, you were right. He is having an affair. And although I don't know this woman's name, Helle was correct. and who she thought he was having an affair with.
Wow.
And so after 12 years of marriage and 3 children, which wasn't all that great because we're going to learn that Richard would physically abuse Helle from time to time, she meets with a divorce attorney named Diane Anderson. She's going to leave Richard, not literally. She's not going to leave their home while they settle the divorce because she's afraid if she did, she might lose custody of her children. She was also afraid if she left him that he would come after her. While she's planning her divorce, she's telling her good friends and even her mother that Richard is cheating. And she also confides in her close friends that Richard was physically abusive at times, something she'd never shared before. She would write to her mom in Denmark and just basically said, I've said to Richard, I want to be divorced. Quote, I no longer trust Richard, end quote. She signs it, hugs Helle. Now, part of what she tells her friends, who she flies with, her crew, she's doing all kinds of international flights with these people, but she tells them the same thing that she tells her divorce attorney when she meets with her for the first time, which is, quote, if anything ever happens to me, don't think that it was an accident, end quote.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
That can't be good.
Yeah.
Now, most of their friends knew that the marriage had been on shaky ground for a little while because he's hitting her and he's being so secretive and now having an affair.
Sure.
But her friends didn't really like Richard. They thought that he was a little bit aloof.
Yeah.
She confided in her friend Lee that she was concerned for her own safety and that she didn't want to move out of the house because she was convinced that Richard would be able to find her and the kids no matter where she went.
Right.
And those fears weren't unfounded because Richard used to run those covert op flights for the CIA's secret war in Laos.
Right.
So, I mean, he's got some training, right?
Sure.
In October of 1986, Helle officially filed for divorce. And Helle was worried about how Richard was going to react to her serving him with divorce papers because when he figures out that Helle is going to divorce him, he tells her that his cancer is back. You see, Richard doesn't want a divorce. Richard doesn't want to pay alimony and child support.
Sure, yeah.
But again, Helle didn't trust him, and so she called his doctor and found out that Richard was lying. He was in perfect health.
Wow.
November 18th, 1986. Between 6:30 and 7 p.m. that night, Helle was dropped off at her house at 5 Newfield Lane by a friend and fellow flight attendant. Helle was really worried about making it back for a parent-teacher conference. Her kids were in 5th grade, 1st grade, and kindergarten at the very same elementary school.
Okay.
Now, when she arrives home that night, she sees that a porch light is on, and she looks to her friend and says, quote, Richard's home, end quote. She's not happy about it.
Yeah.
So Helle's returning from a flight from Frankfurt to New York City, and they live outside the city in Connecticut. But when Helle says goodbye to her friend, it's the last time anyone is ever going to see Helle. Helle's nanny, Dawn Thomas, was out for the night and was not expected back until around midnight. She's actually going to come back to the house around 2 a.m., and she's going to go straight to bed.
Okay.
The next morning, Richard wakes up Dawn, the nanny, at 6 a.m. He told her that the power was out in the house, and he was taking her and the 3 kids to stay at his sister's home in order to stay warm. There was a snowstorm going on outside.
Okay.
So they pack up, and the nanny asks, where's Helle? Where's Helle? She was supposed to come home last night.
Right.
And Richard tells her that she's already at his sister's home. Then as they're about to leave, the youngest daughter, the only daughter, Christina says, I've left my gloves inside the house. But Richard refuses to let this child go back inside the house and get her gloves.
I wonder why.
When they arrive at Richard's sister's place, Helle's not there. And when the nanny questions this, Richard tells her that she must have gone to a friend's house instead. But after he drops them off, Richard leaves. Then he comes back to get them that night. And still, there's no Helle. And while he's driving the 3 children and the nanny back to their home, Richard fell asleep at the wheel and almost went off the road. And the nanny is asking him about Helle. And by the time another day rolls by, she's still asking, where Helle is.
Hmm.
Then on November 20th, this is 2 days since anybody has seen her, the nanny comes home and finds a note from Richard that said, quote, Helle called, end quote.
Okay.
A day later, Richard tells the nanny that his wife, quote, was in Denmark because her mother took very ill. She had to go out immediately, end quote.
Okay.
Now, on this same day 3, it's been 3 days since Helle's been seen by anyone, the nanny, Dawn Thomas, walked into the master bedroom and noticed a black spot the size of a soccer ball on the carpet. And she offers to Richard, she's like, I'll clean this up. But Richard tells her, no, I don't want you to touch it. I, quote, just spilled kerosene there, end quote.
Okay.
Then on November 24th, remember, the last time anybody sees her is November 18th.
Right.
On November 24th, Richard tells Dawn, the nanny, that Helle had, quote, gone to the island with one of her friends, end quote.
She's just going all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on this same day, the nanny walked into the couple's bedroom and found that Richard had removed all the carpet, not just the stain. He removed all the carpet except for a narrow strip around the edge of the room.
Well, that sounds totally logical.
He'd also taken apart the bed and had removed the carpet from little Christina's room. And Richard tells the nanny that Helle wanted the carpets changed. But the nanny knows that Helle loved the carpet in the master bedroom.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Helle doesn't show up for a scheduled flight, and she doesn't call to say, I'm not coming into work. And Helle's friends and coworkers call the Crafts home, and Richard answers the phone, saying the same thing to them that he said to the nanny, that Helle went to Denmark to visit her mom because she was sick. And then later he's going to tell a different story. He'll say that Helle was on vacation with a friend, and he does this to her coworkers as well as to the nanny. But Helle's friends aren't backing down.
Yeah.
Yida Olsen Rompy called Richard to say that he needed to call the police, to which Richard replied, quote, you've been watching too many movies, end quote.
Okay.
To which Yida, who is also from Denmark, tells Richard that Helle wouldn't have left her children or her job without notice because she's very, very responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Richard tells her that Helle would be mad at him if he contacted the police to report her missing. But what Richard doesn't know is that on November 15th, just 3 days before Helle goes missing, that Helle tells her friend that she's angry. She'd found a receipt that showed that Richard had been with his new girlfriend and they'd been out buying Christmas gifts together in New Jersey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So her friend knows he's cheating on her and now she's missing.
Right.
Then her friend Lee calls on November 24th, and Richard tells her that Helle had gone to Copenhagen to visit her mother, who was ill. Yeah, I don't know how he's keeping it all straight, because he's telling different people different things.
Yeah.
But when Lee calls him back, he tells her, quote, I am, in fact, getting a little worried, end quote, because he had not heard from her.
Okay.
Well, wait, you told the nanny that she called.
Right.
So Lee actually calls Helle's mom and learns that Helle wasn't with her mother at all in Denmark. In fact, she wasn't expected to visit until April of 1987. So Lee calls Richard with this news. She's like, look, I called her mom.
Yeah.
And he is dead silent on the phone. And then he said, quote, I don't know where she could be, end quote.
Okay.
And then he suggests that she's with a friend in Paris. So that's a new one. When Lee called back again, Richard was abrupt with her and said that he was leaving on a trip. And in fact, he does leave the state and take the children with him to Florida at some point. But her friends are worried, and they call Helle's divorce attorney and her private investigator, Keith Mayo. And it's her friends and Keith Mayo who go to the Newtown Police Department to report her missing, not her husband. But the police are very dismissive of their concerns and, quote, turned a deaf ear, end quote.
Why?
Well, no one knows, but if I was a betting girl, I'd say it was because Richard was a part-time police officer with the Newtown Police.
Right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yep.
And my guess is he probably told them that he was Air America CIA. I'm sure they looked up to him.
Yep. And we're afraid of him at the same
Maybe.
time. Yeah.
Now, when the police didn't follow up or seem concerned, Keith Mayo launched his own investigation, and he starts with the nanny. He questions her, and when he hears what she has to say, he's beside himself. She tells him about the big stain on the carpet, and then the missing carpet, and the weird morning at 6 a.m. making everybody leave the house. And she gives some information that no one's heard yet. She tells Keith that a large freezer, which was relatively new, had gone missing from the garage. Now, knowing what he knows, the private eye, that Helle has said to him, if something happens to me, it wasn't an accident, and that Richard's having an affair, Keith takes his findings to the county prosecutor, who then turned the case over to the Connecticut State Police. Keith Mayo tells them what the nanny has said about the stain on the carpet, Richard's conflicting stories about where Helle is, and Keith tells of Helle's fears of Richard, and her friends tell the authorities about the domestic violence, and they really started to look into Helle's disappearance. Now, Keith also sends a letter to the Newtown Police Commissioner. Quote, "As you are aware, I attempted to report Mrs. Crafts missing to the Newtown Police Department on December 1st, 1986. She's missing on November 18th. And it's December 1st and her friends and her private eye who actually report it."
Wow.
At that time, I was aware of certain details of her disappearance, which would lead any detective to believe she did not voluntarily disappear.
Sure.
For unknown reasons, the Newtown Police Department, particularly the Detective Division, refused to treat this matter seriously. Without going into further detail, I strongly recommend that your commission undertake an independent investigation to determine the facts and circumstances surrounding the obvious irresponsibility of the Newtown Police Department's Detective Division. End quote.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty scathing.
Yeah. And the state police, well, they start with the husband. They start with Richard.
Yep.
They look into his credit card history, and what they discover is that Richard had rented a wood chipper, a commercial-grade wood chipper, and a U-Haul shortly before his wife went missing.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to tell you right now, I think there was a little bit of divine intervention in this case.
Okay.
Because after the state police find out that Richard rented a wood chipper, a snowplow driver named Joseph Heim comes forward reporting that he'd seen a wood chipper on the bridge that ran over the Housatonic River where it meets Lake Zoar at around 3:30 a.m. the night that Helle was last seen.
Wow.
Now remember, there's a snowstorm that night.
Right.
And this driver sees a man wearing an orange poncho standing near this wood chipper on the bridge. He waves him around. He's like, "Go around me." And an hour later, while Joseph is still clearing roads, he sees the same wood chipper on River Road. Now, what are the chances that this guy would see him? It's 3:30 in the morning. He is clearing roads because it's a snowstorm, so that makes sense.
Right.
So police are thinking perhaps there's some evidence to be gleaned from this area where he has seen this wood chipper. So they ask the driver to take them to the exact location where he had seen the wood chipper and the man and the orange poncho. And they start searching down by this riverbank where he sees it the second time. That's where he sees the wood chipper the second time. Meanwhile, police ask Richard to take a lie detector test.
His police department?
No, the state police department.
Okay, I'm trying to keep all the players straight here.
Yeah, the state police department asks him to take a lie detector test. And they ask him if he knew anything about the disappearance of his wife. Had he done something to his wife? He's very cold. He shows no reaction. I even read that his eyes were so dark that he had a really scary, cold stare.
Wow.
And as you might imagine, a former Marine pilot working for the CIA passed his lie detector test with flying colors.
Yeah.
He's like, "No, I have no idea where Helle is. I had nothing to do with her disappearance."
Right.
It's at this point that the Connecticut State Police call in forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee. He's the director of forensics in Connecticut.
Okay.
He went with the police to the Crafts' home, and they started examining everything in the house, piece by piece. That was the last place that she was seen. And on the mattress, Dr. Lee finds 5 tiny stains. And these are so small you could hardly make them out.
Okay.
But then he found a 6-inch blood smear on the side of the mattress.
Mm-hmm.
In the bathroom, all the towels had been recently laundered. But when they test this mattress and the towels with orthotolodine, or O-tolodine, it's a blood detection test that's been phased out now due to carcinogenic concerns, because now we use luminol.
Right.
But what they discover in Dr. Lee's lab is that the specks on the mattress are blood, and they can tell that it is circulation blood from a living person when it lands on the mattress.
Oh, really?
Which meant a blood vessel had to be injured.
Gotcha.
The antigen test showed it was type O positive. Do you want to guess what type of blood Helle had?
Let me think about it. Typo?
She's type O positive.
Yeah.
The towels show that they'd been soaked in blood. They turn blue when they're tested, but they don't have a body.
Mm-hmm.
No body, no crime. But as they're searching on the riverbank, they go back to this riverbank. They're searching on this riverbank where Joe, the snowplow driver, sees the guy with the wood chipper, and they start digging. And they mostly find wood chips and leaves. But when they dig a little more, they found a small piece of mail addressed to Miss Helle Crafts.
Really?
Ruh-roh.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to tell you first off, back in 1986, the movie Fargo had not been released, and the police think that this wood chipper has absolutely nothing to do with Helle's disappearance. That is, until they spend 8 days sifting through dirt, leaves, and twigs on this riverbank, and then they start to find things. Blonde hair.
Ooh.
Then they find some blue fibers, a gray piece of metal, tiny bone fragments, and then they find a finger with a fingernail.
There you go.
It's painted red. And they find it because after the snowstorm, the snow started melting, and the finger and fingernail was right up against a wall right by the bridge.
Wow.
So then divers come in and they get in this water. That water had to be so cold. Hats off to them.
Yep.
If you've ever been a diver before, you know, even if you're wearing a dry suit or a wetsuit, it's awful.
Yep.
But when the divers get in the water, they find pieces of a chainsaw. So they pull it out. The serial number on it has been scratched off. They take it all to Meridian, Connecticut, where the state police and the forensics team are. The story's now front page news, and not just in Connecticut and New York City. It's front page news around the world and in Denmark, where Helle was from. Richard Crafts is a suspect, but he's maintaining his innocence. And he would say, I didn't kill my wife. I don't know where she is, and I've passed a lie detector test. Now, Dr. Lee, the forensics guy, gets together with his forensics team, including H. Wayne Carver II, MD, who is the chief medical examiner in Connecticut. They examine every single notch on this chainsaw, and they found human hair, human tissue, and a tiny piece of fiber, a blue-green cotton.
Wow.
It's the same color, according to the nanny, as Helle's favorite cotton nightshirt.
Really?
And this fiber matched other blue fibers that they found at the river. But with the serial number on the chainsaw scratched away, it was impossible to know who owned it. Or was it? Because they take it back to the lab, and then they used a chemical solution to take off the top layers of the metal to get down to where the numbers were still engraved. And it worked.
Wow.
5921616. And they call the chainsaw company, and it matched the warranty card sent in by Richard B. Crafts.
Wow.
Then they go to this hair. They keep finding this blonde hair.
Right.
2,600 strands of it. And they want to know, whose hair is this? They examine it under a microscope, and a lot of the hair was cut, but not with scissors. So they get Helle's hairbrush from her bathroom.
I was going to say, yeah.
And they conclude that the hair in the brush matches the hair they found in the chainsaw and on the riverbank side. Then they looked at the finger in the fingernail. Red nail polish. They take the red fingernail polish from Helle's nightstand at home and analyze it to see if it's a match. And
it is.
It's a match. Yeah. I mean, this is a slam dunk, right?
Yeah.
And here's when they put it all together. All of the evidence was pointing to the fact that Helle was dead and was put through a wood chipper. But there was no body, and you can't declare a person dead without a body. So they called in Dr. Albert Harper, a biological anthropologist, and he looks at the pieces of bones. He wants them ID'd, and Dr. Lee thinks it's all gone through the wood chipper. So they did a test to see if this flesh had gone through a wood chipper. They put a pig through the exact same wood chipper. They went and got that exact same wood chipper.
Yeah.
They put a pig through the wood chipper because it's the closest to human skin and flesh.
Right.
And what they discovered is that the bone fragments for the pig had the same pattern of cuts as the bone fragments they found that are human. These are millimeter fragments.
Jeez.
And the grooves in the bones are exactly like what they found. And they realize that these are fragments of a human skull.
Right. Wow.
But they put the bones under a microscope and they see these tiny grooves in the bones that were formed by blood vessels. And that confirmed it was a human skull.
Okay.
It was a human skull fragment from the top of her head. Then they also ID'd skull fragments from the side of the head. And the investigators are wondering if she was dead before she went into the wood chipper or after, because they don't know.
Right.
So they've got this dead body. Who is it? They freeze bone fragments because they don't have DNA.
Right.
They freeze bone fragments with liquid nitrogen. They pulverize it down, and they determine that the deceased person has type O positive blood. Then there was this tiny piece of metal. I don't know if you caught that when I was going through the list.
I just thought maybe it was a piece of jewelry or something.
Tiny piece of metal. It was a crown from a tooth. But there was no human flesh or cells attached to the crown. So the forensic odontologist, Gus Karazoulis, goes to the riverbank where he has a pail. He's like, I'm going to go searching too.
Okay.
He's been there for like 8 hours, and he was picking up evidence, what he thought might be evidence. But as he's doing this, he slides into a brook, and he's picking himself up. He had muddy hands from trying to break his fall, and he cleans off his muddy hand in the pail, like he scrapes his muddy hand into the pail.
Right.
And then he went into the tent to put down the pail and wash his hand. And when he goes back, there was the tooth.
Oh.
Divine intervention, I'm telling you.
Yeah. Wow.
They took the tooth and matched it to the dental records of Helle Crafts.
Yep.
They also get the exact U-Haul rented by Richard and discover that there were traces of human remains in the back of the truck. So what did he put in the truck? The freezer?
Yeah.
The freezer that's missing from the garage?
Right.
Because it's never found. But 5 days before Helle goes missing, Richard ordered a new freezer. And the dealer was confused when he ordered it because he refused to give his name or address. Richard won't give his name or address. He pays in cash, and he insists on picking up the freezer myself. He's going to replace the freezer.
Yeah.
Now, finally, the medical examiner will say if Helle Crafts' teeth are in this pile and they were knocked out of her head violently, and we have a human head going through a violent injury in the same pile,
okay,
the medical examiner concludes that Helle Crafts is dead and is legally declared as such on January 13th, 1987.
Wow.
Also on January 13th, 1987, Richard is arrested and held on a $750,000 bail.
Wow.
Now, due to the publicity the case had received, prosecutors had to move the trial to New London, Connecticut. Their argument was that Richard had killed his wife because she wanted a divorce and he didn't.
Right.
And in order to prove their case, they laid out for the jurors the chain of events, and here's what they believe happened.
Okay.
On the night of her disappearance, Helle put the children to bed around 8 p.m. before changing into her favorite nightshirt, which matches the blue fibers found on the riverbank, and she checks her mail. Now, once in her room, in the master bedroom, Richard hits her in the head twice with his police flashlight. The first blow knocks her to the ground. The second produces the blood spatter. And as she falls to the ground, her head leaves the blood smear on the side of the mattress, the 6-inch blood smear.
Right.
Then he wrapped her body in the bed sheets, stuffed it into the freezer in the garage overnight, goes back to the room and tries to clean up the blood stains on the carpet using the bathroom towels, which he will later wash. The nanny comes home at 2 a.m. and goes straight to bed, none the wiser. Then at daybreak, at dawn, he wakes them all, and after dropping off Dawn and the children at his sister's house, Richard returned home, where he took Helle's body out of the freezer and transported it in the U-Haul to the Housatonic River, along with some wood, where he dismembered her with the chainsaw and ran her body parts through the wood chipper with the wood.
Wow.
And because the body was frozen, there was no blood spatter, and her remains basically floated down the river.
Jeez.
After, he took apart the chainsaw, threw it into the river. The pieces that fell short and landed on the bank were exactly what Dr. Lee and his team found. And somehow, the piece of mail went through the chipper untouched. How?
Yeah.
How?
Divine intervention.
Divine intervention.
Yeah.
And why did she even have this envelope on her?
Yeah.
She's in her pajamas.
Right.
Again, divine intervention.
Right.
Richard's sister, Karen Rogers, actually testified for the state, saying that her brother's home was in disarray when her family visited him at Thanksgiving. She said that her brother was tired of his wife's friends asking her whereabouts. Quote, "They act like I've cut her head off," end quote. Well, isn't that rich?
Oh, man.
Now, his defense team characterized him as an abandoned husband who was unfairly tried for a murder he didn't commit. Remember, he passed his polygraph test.
Sure.
They suggested that Helle vanished of her own free will.
She threw herself in the wood chipper.
Yeah. Well, they're just saying you can't, there's no body, and this
Right.
is very little evidence. It's all circumstantial.
Except the
Is
tooth.
it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The first jury to hear the case ends in a mistrial because one juror refused to find Richard guilty and then refused to continue to deliberate after 12 weeks of testimony and 17 days of deliberation.
Do we know who this juror was?
Yes, their name was actually in the newspaper, and I felt a little bit sorry for him.
Yeah, I wonder what the relationship was with
I don't
Richard.
think there was a relationship.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think there was a relationship.
Okay.
But remember, there's no body.
Yeah.
The second time the case is tried in Norwalk Superior Court, Judge Martin L. Nigro is presiding. And the same people testified all over again, but the prosecution had one more witness, Richard's brother-in-law, David Rogers.
Really?
David told the jury that in January of 1987, just a month after Helle goes missing, David tells Richard that the state police divers were searching for evidence around a steel bridge near Lake Zoar. And Richard said to him, quote, "Let them dive. There's no body. It's gone," end quote. What?
Oh, my God. Richard's not too smart.
As for the wood chipper, Richard told his brother-in-law, quote, "Oh, they found out about that, did they? I'm going to tell them that I got it to clear brush on my lot in Currituck Road, and it will be a dead end for them. That's as far as they can go," end quote.
Man, once again, the arrogance.
Arrogance. But at some point, Richard had to be panicking because he asked David to get rid of his truck bumper and the tow bar he had in his house. Have no idea why. Now, remember, the prosecution's been prosecuting for 2 trials and 18 months at this point.
Right.
And after 380 exhibits, including less than 3 ounces of human body parts, 11 men and 1 woman, after listening to 5 hours of tapes, they deliberate for 9 hours and found Richard Crafts intentionally killed his wife, Helle.
Wow. Now,
while they read this guilty verdict, Richard showed no emotion. The decision came 3 years to the day after state police arrested him. He was sentenced to 50 years on January 8th, 1988. The 3 children stayed with friends for a little while, but ultimately they were raised by Richard's sister, who testified against him,
Really?
as did her husband.
Wow.
Now, back then, even though Richard was sentenced to 50 years, there were laws in effect that allowed a prisoner to serve way less time if they had good behavior while in prison. And on November 1st, 2019, Richard was released from prison and moved to a halfway house. On January 29th, 2020, he was moved from the Isaiah Halfway House in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to a homeless shelter for veterans. It was all a part of Richard's transition from prison to a full release from custody, which was August 1st, 2020.
Okay.
He was 82 years old.
Wow.
Now, after this, Richard Crafts becomes a ghost. There's no information as to whether he's alive or dead today.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, some items of note with this case, it was the first case to ever go to court and get a conviction without a body in the state of Connecticut. Also, the wood chipper scene in Fargo, it's based on Richard murdering Helle.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And the show, Forensic Files,
Yeah.
this case was the very first case featured on the show. Season 1, episode 1.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So Helle, only guilty of being beaten and cheated on by her husband,
Sure.
loved her children, and he just didn't want to pay alimony.
Yeah.
He didn't want to pay child support. He wanted his cake and eat it too.
Yep.
And he was very much that person, according to her friends. He was very much, masculine. I'm the man. I make the decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, he made some poor decisions.
Yeah.
But that is the story of the wood chipper murder. And that's all I have to say about that. She is only one, but what if one is all that's needed? Hospice nurse Indy Luce has fallen in love. After caring for billionaire Louis Thornberry until his final breath, she's now engaged to marry the heir apparent of the global tech empire, David Thornberry. But as the divinely marked Indy packs up her old life to begin anew, a sacred promise comes back to haunt her with a vengeance. As an unrelenting spiritual battle unfolds in the shadows, the descendants of those like Indy find themselves persistently lured and ensnared as a relentless surge of evil becomes an unstoppable force. With malevolent entities following her every step, what Indy doesn't know about her family's sacred covenant could tip the scales of good and evil. The follow-up to the paranormal suspense novel Lead Me from Temptation and Book 2 of the Divine Darkness series, Deliver Me from Evil, is now available March 29th, 2024, wherever you buy or download books, or go to chriscalvert.com. If evil prowls seeking someone to devour, can one woman seek and save that which is lost?
You know what always amazes me is that these criminals, these murderers, the arrogance and the fact that they think that they can outsmart everyone.
Yeah.
And that no one's ever going to catch them and they won't know and this and that. It's
really their downfall.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's really their downfall. But what I couldn't get over was he's just an ordinary, he's an ordinary guy. He's a pilot.
Yeah.
And he had this whole thing, this whole plan to freeze her and to use the wood chipper and to take her down to this river, this area where there's water. And, what did he see in Vietnam?
I know. Jeez.
I'm not saying that that's what turned him into a murderer, but at the same time, it's kind of like that's a pretty cold-hearted thing. It's not like she was cheating on him. He was cheating on her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, he's cold-hearted.
Very much. You'd never put me through a wood chipper, would you, honey?
Never. Never.
Even when I'm making you crazy, you wouldn't think about a wood chipper.
Never. Oh, man. All right. Well, let's leave that behind.
Okay.
And go forward.
Yes.
To a bunch of morons.
All right.
With a little bless your heart.
Well, bless your heart.
All right. Number 1. News you can use.
All right.
An Arizona man is behind bars facing multiple criminal charges after he allegedly led police on a high-speed chase west of Phoenix and called a news station to ask what he should do.
What? He's calling the news station while he's in the middle of the high-speed chase?
You got it.
Oh, my gosh.
Joshua Bloom led police on a 40-mile chase, reaching speeds of nearly 100 miles an hour.
Oh, my gosh.
Maricopa County Sheriff's Office deputies flattened Bloom's tires with spike strips.
Oh, there you go.
So that he was driving on rims, but not before the suspect made a call to 3TV seeking advice. Reporter Mike Watkiss spoke to Bloom.
This is a reporter's dream, by the way. Exactly. He's like, I'm going to get an Emmy for this.
Pulitzer. Quote, I said, you need to pull over, recalls Watkiss. Whatever's going on, it'll only get worse if you keep heading out.
Yeah, good advice.
Yep, he was finally caught and apprehended and charged.
Yeah, and that was the top story that night on the news station.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They ran that for 5 nights in a row.
They did, for sure.
All right, number 2, you're so romantic.
Okay. Am I? Am I the romantic one or are you the romantic one?
We're both romantic.
Are we?
Yes, we are.
I think you're more romantic than I am.
No.
I do. I think I get the flowers and the cards and I think you're probably more romantic than I am. A hopeless romantic.
You never get me flowers.
I do not. Isn't that a Barbra Streisand song? You don't bring me flowers anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, number 2, you're so romantic. Okay, here we go.
All right.
A San Antonio man asked his girlfriend to marry him immediately after the couple were arrested for aggravated robbery.
They're in the back of the car in the cruiser.
Well,
Will you marry me?
Hang on. Sean Fox, 27, was arrested after he tried to stop employees of a dollar store from preventing her from shoplifting.
Oh, okay.
Managers of the dollar store attempted to stop Trayla Woods, 24, as she tried to leave the store. Fox, 27, the alleged driver of her getaway car, came inside to help rescue her, police said.
Get off my shoplifting girlfriend.
Police soon arrived and arrested the lovebirds.
Aww.
Yep. Fox yelled his proposal to Woods while the two were being questioned separately at the station.
I love you.
And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
She said yes.
Of course she did.
There you go.
Chivalry is not dead.
It's not. And they're proving it with their love. All right, number 3. And finally.
Okay.
2-time loser.
All right.
All right. A Tampa Bay teen was arrested twice within hours after authorities say he tried to break into a car in the jail parking lot.
What?
Now, here's what happened. The Pasco County Sheriff's Office reports that 18-year-old Richard Owens was originally arrested and charged with trespassing and processed at the jail.
Okay.
After his release, a deputy spotted him trying to break into a locked Pontiac GTO in the jail parking lot.
He didn't even make it out of the parking lot.
Owens told the deputy the car belonged to a friend who was there to pick him up.
Oh.
But the car's actual owner was another deputy.
I was going to say it's another police officer's car.
Owens was charged with auto burglary. He was then being held on a $5,000 bail.
Oops. What kind of car was it again?
It was a GTO.
Yeah, definitely. Police officers love to drive souped up cars. Haven't you ever seen like their cars? Like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Burning some rubber.
Absolutely. Just not on the wheels like story number 1.
Exactly.
But there's some sparks flying there.
Yeah. Whatever.
Well, I feel bad for him. Bless his heart. Couldn't even make it out of the parking lot.
He was on his way out and then he got held $5,000 bail.
Stupid. Bless his heart.
Yep.
Well, if you have a bless your heart or you know somebody's heart who needs blessing or can't make it out of the parking lot without breaking into a deputy's car.
Mercy.
All you got to do is go to hitchedtohomicide.com. When you get there, there's a pull-down menu. And while you're there, you can also suggest a case and tell us about your own true crime story.
Yeah.
Make sure it's something that we can actually tell.
Exactly. Oh, Lord.
That's my amazing husband out there.
And that's my beautiful bride in the booth.
Join us next time on Hitched to Homicide.
Bye, y'all.